The church bell tolls across the misty riverbank, and in the rushing current, a knight is dragged under. Out of all the noblemen, it is a poor washerwoman who throws herself into the flood and saves his life. By morning, the castle is in uproar. Before lords and ladies, the knight bows low. Calling her his lady, gasps echo through the hall for a servant. Has been raised higher than the proudest noble, but whispers coil through the stone corridors. Her mother once stood accused of theft. Her enemies are waiting to tear her down. And an old betrothal still binds the knight to another. She saved him from death, but can she survive the court's cruelty? When love defies blood and rank, will the truth set her free, or will scandal destroy them both? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The autumn air nipped at Anne Whitlow's cheeks as she made her way down the worn path to the riverbank, her heavy basket of linens weighing against her hip. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and grays, while wisps of mist danced over the rushing water. The manor's great house loomed behind her, its windows still dark in the early morning hour, and adjusted her worn shawl with one hand, keeping a firm grip on her basket with the other. The riverbank was quiet, save for the gentle sound of running water and the occasional bird call. She began to hum softly, then let her voice lift in a gentle song her mother had taught her years ago. The familiar melody helped ward off the morning chill as she knelt at the water's edge. A fair maid walked in summer's light. She sang, dipping the first sheet into the cold water. Her strong hands worked the fabric against her washboard, creating rhythmic splashing sounds that joined her tune. Through fields of golden wheat, the peaceful moment shattered as thundering hoofbeats echoed from the upper bank. Its head snapped up, her song dying in her throat. Through the morning mist, she saw a massive black horse galloping wildly along the muddy path. Its rider, clad in gleaming armor, fought to maintain control as the beast reared and twisted. "Look out!" Anne cried, but her warning came too late. The horse's hooves slipped in the mud, and the rider was thrown from his seat. Anne watched in horror as he plummeted down the bank and into the rushing current with a tremendous splash. Without thinking, Anne dropped her washing and plunged into the river. The icy water stole her breath, but she forced herself forward, fighting against the current. The weight of the knight's armor was pulling him under rapidly. She could see his arms thrashing as he struggled to stay afloat. "Hold fast," she called, pushing through the water with powerful strokes. Her mother had taught her to swim in this very river, and now she was grateful for those lessons. She reached the drowning man and grabbed hold of his surcoat, trying to keep his head above water. The knight sputtered and coughed as Anne dragged him toward the shore. Her muscles screamed with the effort of fighting both the current and the weight of his armor. After what felt like ages, her feet finally found purchase on the riverbed. With one final surge of strength, she hauled them both onto the bank. They collapsed on the muddy ground, both gasping for air. The knight rolled onto his side, coughing up river water. Anne sat up, pushing her soaked hair from her face as she caught her breath. "My lady," the knight said weakly, looking at her with startling blue eyes, "you have saved my life. I am in your debt." Despite his bedraggled state, his voice carried the refined accent of nobility. "'Tis no debt, sir," Anne replied suddenly, conscious of her dripping clothes and humble station. Any soul would have done the same. He pushed himself to sitting, removing his helm to reveal handsome features and dark hair plastered to his forehead. "I am Sir Edmund of Hereford, newly returned from the King's Wars. Pray tell me the name of my brave rescuer." Anne felt her cheeks warm, despite the chill. "Anne Whitlow, sir. Serve in your father's household." "Then I shall ensure he knows of your courage, Mistress Whitlow." Sir Edmund's eyes held hers with grave courtesy. "You have my word. Your deed will not be forgotten." Anne ducked her head, unwilling to hope for more than simple gratitude. "You are most kind, sir. but I ask no reward. I must return to my duties." She rose on shaking legs, gathering her scattered washing with trembling hands. The sun had risen. Fully by the time Anne made her way back to the manor, her skirts leaving wet trails on the flagstone floors. Her hands were raw and torn from hauling the night from the water, and her teeth still chattered from the cold. "Where have you been, girl?" The housekeeper's sharp voice made her jump. "The morning's half gone, and not a stitch of washing done." "I beg pardon, Mrs. Hayes," Anne murmured, but even the scolding couldn't dampen the warm glow in her chest. In her mind's eye, she saw again those piercing blue eyes regarding her with such genuine gratitude. She pressed her rough hands to her still flushed cheeks. Knowing she would remember this morning for a very long time to come, the morning sun streamed through the great hall's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished oak floors. Where Anne worked, on her hands and knees, she moved the scrub brush in careful circles, the scent of lavender soap rising with each stroke. Above her, the clatter of silver and china marked the preparations for the Earl's breakfast as servants hurried to and fro. Lords and ladies in their fine morning clothes began filtering into the hall, their shoes clicking against the sections of floor Anne had already cleaned. She kept her head down, as was proper, though she couldn't help noticing the rustle of silk skirts and the subtle perfumes that marked the nobility's passage. "Lady," Margaret's voice cut through the quiet murmur of conversation, "do ensure the table settings are precisely as the Earl prefers them. We cannot have another incident like last week's stop team." The great doors suddenly swung wide, and a hush fell over the assembled company. Anne glanced up through her lashes to see Sir Edmund of Harrowfield entering, supported by 2 retainers. Her heart skipped at the sight of him, so different from the sodden man she'd pulled from the river. Now he stood tall in a deep blue velvet coat, his dark hair neatly tied back, though she noticed he favored his right leg slightly. "My Lord Father," Edmund called out, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I must share with you and our honored guests the tale of my preservation yesterday morning." The Earl of Harrowfield, seated at the head of the long table, set down his cup with a sharp click. "What is this about, Edmund?" Anne's cheeks burned as Edmund began recounting his accident at the river. She wished she could sink into the floor. Beneath her scrub brush, the assembled nobility listened with increasing interest as he described his horse's fright, his fall into the rushing water. And then Edmund's voice softened with genuine emotion. This brave soul risked her own life to save mine. He turned, his eyes finding an immediately among the servants. "Miss Anne Whitlow, would you stand?" 100 eyes turned to where Anne knelt on the floor, her rough work dress soaked at the knees, her hands red from scrubbing. For a moment, she couldn't move, but then Lady Margaret cleared her throat meaningfully, and Anne scrambled to her feet, keeping her eyes lowered. To her horror, Edmund began walking toward her, shrugging off his retainer's support. Before anyone could stop him, he lowered himself to one knee before her, sending a shockwave of gasps through the hall. "Sir Edmund," the Earl's voice cracked like thunder. "What are you doing?" "Showing proper gratitude," Father Edmund replied firmly. "This woman is my savior, and I name her my Lady of Gratitude before all assembled here." He reached for Anne's work-roughened hand and pressed something into it, a sprig of fresh rosemary, sweet scent rising between them. Anne managed a deep curtsy, her face aflame. "My lord is too kind," she whispered, her voice barely carrying. Around her, the whispers grew like leaves in a rising wind. "A washerwoman's daughter, ... came one voice. Above herself, muttered another. "How shocking," a lady sniffed. The Earl's frown deepened, but Edmund remained unmoved. "I insist she be honored appropriately," he declared, rising slowly to his feet. Her courage and quick thinking preserved the life of a Harrowfield, and such service must not go unremarked. Anne kept her eyes fixed on the floor, acutely aware of every stare, every whispered comment. She could feel Lady Margaret's sharp gaze and the Earl's disapproving frown. The weight of their attention pressed down on her like a physical thing. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of the laundress quarters, Anne sat on her narrow bed, turning the sprig of rosemary between her fingers. Its fragrant leaves released their woodsy scent with each touch. The morning's events seemed almost dreamlike now, yet the herb in her hands proved their reality. She pressed it gently to her nose, breathing in its sweet perfume, and wondered what changes tomorrow might bring. Evening shadows lengthened across the manor's great hall as servants lit dozens of beeswax candles in their brass holders. The massive stone fireplace crackled with flames that sent dancing light. Across the gathered faces of the Harrowfield family and their noble guests, Anne stood before them all, her hands clasped tightly to keep them from trembling. The Earl sat in his carved oak chair, like a judge preparing to pass sentence. "Step forward, girl," the Earl commanded, his deep voice echoing in the hushed chamber. Anne moved closer, conscious of every eye upon her. Her worn dress seemed suddenly coarser than ever against the fine garments surrounding her. The firelight caught the silver in the Earl's hair as he studied her with sharp eyes. "So," he said finally, "you are the laundress who saved my son." His tone held neither warmth nor censure. "And now he would name you a lady." "I seek no honors, my lord," Anne replied softly, keeping her eyes lowered. "I did only what any Christian soul would do." Lady Margaret, who stood at her brother's right hand, made a small sound that might have been approval or disdain. Her black widow's weeds absorbed the firelight, making her seem like a shadow among the colorful silks of the other guests. The Earl's fingers drummed once on the arm of his chair. Pretty words, but titles of respect must be earned, not merely given. Even my son's gratitude cannot transform a laundress into a lady without proof of her worthiness. Whispers rustled through the assembled company like autumn leaves. Anne felt her cheeks grow hot, but she held herself straight and still. "Therefore," the Earl continued, "I propose a test. You shall serve as lady-in-waiting to my sister, Lady Margaret. For 3 months you will learn the ways of gentle society. If you can conduct yourself with grace and avoid any hint of scandal, you may keep the title my son bestowed." Lady Margaret's stern face betrayed no emotion, though her fingers tightened. "On her prayer book, brother, you cannot mean I do mean it," the Earl cut in. Who better to judge if this girl can rise above her station? He turned back to Anne. "Well, do you accept these terms?" Anne's heart pounded. To refuse would shame Sir Edmund's generous gesture. To accept meant leaving behind everything familiar for a world that might crush her. She took a steadying breath and curtsied deeply. "I am honored by your lordship's offer," she said clearly. "I accept." "So be it." The Earl gestured to a waiting servant. "Take her to the blue chamber in the family wing. See that she is properly clothed. Her days of washing linens are ended." As Anne followed the servant from the hall, she heard the buzz of conversation rise behind her, through the corridors and up the narrow servants' stairs. She caught fragments of whispered commentary from the household staff who pressed against the walls to let her pass. Above herself, "That one, ... won't last a week with Lady Margaret, ... double quotes, thinks she's better than us now, ... The blue chamber, when they reached it, was larger than the entire cottage where Anne had grown up. A real bed stood against one wall, hung with blue wool curtains. A small fire burned in the grate, and a single candle flickered on the wooden table. When the servant had gone, Anne sank to her knees beside the straw mattress that had been hastily brought up for her. The stone floor was cold through her thin skirt. Outside, the deep bells of the chapel began to toll Compline, marking the end of her first day in this new life. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "grant me strength to bear this trial with grace. Let me bring no shame to those who have shown me kindness." Her fingers found the small wooden cross her mother had given her, worn smooth by years of similar prayers. The bells continued their measured count, each toll marking another hour gone from her old life as a simple laundress, each toll drawing her deeper into an unknown future. The autumn sun had barely crested the horizon when Anne woke in her new chamber. The small room, though humble, felt grand compared to her former sleeping space in the servants' quarters. She dressed carefully in the gray wool gown provided for her new station, her fingers trembling as she smoothed the finer fabric than she'd ever worn before. A sharp knock startled her. "Come at once," commanded Lady Margaret through the door. "We have much to accomplish today." Anne hurried to follow Lady Margaret's swift stride through the manor's corridors. "You will accompany me on my rounds to the tenant cottages," the older woman explained, her voice crisp. "Then you shall assist with the ladies' embroidery circle. Watch everything. Learn quickly." The morning air bit cold as they walked the muddy paths between the cottages. Anne's heart ached, seeing the familiar poverty, thin smoke from chimneys, patched thatch, hollow-cheeked children. At the third cottage, they found young Mary Cooper's boy burning with fever. "Nothing to be done," Lady Margaret said, turning to leave. "The physician won't come for tenant folk." "Please, my lady," Anne spoke softly. "My mother taught me healing herbs. If I might, ... Double quotes, Lady Margaret's stern face softened slightly. "Very well. Show me." Anne gathered feverfew and willow bark, brewing a tea as she'd done countless times before. She bathed the child's hot forehead with cool cloths, singing gentle lullabies until his breathing eased. When they left, the boy was sleeping peacefully. "You have a gift," Lady Margaret admitted as they walked back. "Perhaps more useful than embroidery." The afternoon brought fresh challenges in the solar where noble ladies gathered to sew. Anne's stitches were neat but simple compared to their elaborate work. Yet she listened attentively, offered thread and scissors with quiet grace, and treated the ladies' maids with the same courtesy as their mistresses. She felt Sir Edmund's presence before she saw him, standing in the doorway watching the circle. Their eyes met briefly, and her heart fluttered at his slight smile. But then a commotion at the entrance drew all attention. "Lady Eleanor!" several women exclaimed as a striking woman in deep blue silk swept into the room. "I simply had to come at once when I heard the la 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 la." "Interesting news," Lady Eleanor announced, her smile sharp as a blade. She moved to stand beside Edmund, placing her hand possessively on his arm. "After all, what kind of betrothed would I be to stay away when my future husband is bestowing titles on serving girls?" The room fell silent. Anne's fingers grew cold. Around her embroidery hoop, she hadn't known, how could she have known, that Edmund was promised to another. "Come now, Eleanor," Edmund said quietly, removing her hand. "This is neither the time nor place." But Eleanor's voice carried clearly. "Really, Edmund, it's sweet that you wish to reward the girl's assistance. But surely you see how inappropriate all this attention is. Someone of her ... background." The whispers began then, spreading like poison through the solar. Ladies drew back their skirts as an abstay, as though her common birth might soil the silk. She heard the murmurs, presumptuous and above her station, and what was Edmund thinking? Only Lady Margaret's sharp voice cut through the gossip. "I believe we have all done enough sewing for today." Anne fled to her chamber as soon as she could escape, her cheeks burning with shame. She was a fool to think she could belong in this world of silk and ceremony. The setting sun painted her small room in deep shadows as she sank onto her bed, too tired even for tears. A soft scraping sound made her look toward the door. There in the gap beneath it lay a folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, Anne opened the note and read the carefully penned words. "Fear not their scorn. I am with you. She pressed the paper to her heart, hope and fear warring in her chest. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she was not entirely alone. The great hall blazed with torchlight, its ancient stone walls echoing with the sound of pipes and drums. 2 weeks had passed since Anne's elevation, and now the Earl's harvest. Feast filled every corner with warmth and celebration. Villagers in their best clothes mingled with the manor's household, though careful lines of rank remained visible in where people stood and sat. Anne perched uncomfortably at the edge of a bench among the minor ladies, her new wool dress feeling strange against her skin. She watched the dancers twirl past, their shadows dancing on the walls like spirits. The scent of roasted meat and fresh bread made her stomach flutter, though she was too nervous to eat much. These country dances are quite spirited, sniffed the lady beside her, adjusting her lace cap. It's nothing like the refined movements at court. Anne nodded politely, her fingers twisting in her lap. She missed the easy cheer of past harvest feasts, when she had served rather than sat among the guests. At least then she had known her place. A hush fell over the crowd as Sir Edmund strode through the dancers. His dark blue doublet caught the firelight, and his eyes sought Anne's across the room. She felt her cheeks warm as he approached, aware of every watching eye. "Miss Whitlow," he said, bowing formally, "would you honor me with this dance?" Whispers rustled through the hall like autumn leaves. Anne saw Lady Eleanor's face darken with fury from across the room. The Earl's stern gaze weighted the air. But Edmund's hand remained extended, his smile gentle and encouraging. "Yes, my lord," Anne managed, rising on shaking legs. She placed her hand in his, and he led her to the center of the hall. The musicians struck up a country reel. Anne's heart thundered, certain she would stumble. But Edmund's strong hands guided her surely through the steps, and slowly her fear melted away. She remembered dancing at village festivals, the same music playing, though in humbler surroundings. Her feet found their confidence. Together they wove through the other couples, Edmund's eyes never leaving her face. Anne felt herself smiling, caught up in the pure joy of movement. She could almost forget the watching crowd, lost in this moment of perfect harmony with him. "You dance beautifully," Edmund murmured as they turned past the musicians. "My mother taught me," Anne replied softly, though never in such fine company. The dance ended too soon. As the music faded, Anne became aware again of the crowd's attention. But the hostile whispers had quieted, replaced by murmurs of appreciation. Even the Earl's stern expression had softened slightly as he watched them bow to each other. Before Anne could return to her seat, Edmund touched her elbow. "Walk with me a moment," he asked quietly. "The garden is lit for the feast." Heart pounding, Anne followed him through the open doors into the torchlit courtyard. The harvest moon hung low and golden above the manor walls, and the autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. They stopped beside a stone bench, far enough from the doors for privacy, but still within sight of the feast. Edmund turned to face her, his expression serious. "I must tell you something," he said. "Something I can keep silent no longer." He took her hands in his, and Anne felt them trembling slightly. "My heart is yours, Anne Whitlow, not Eleanor's, though our families arranged that match years ago. I will break the betrothal, whatever the cost." Anne's breath caught. "My Lord Dedmond, the scandal would be terrible." "Your father, let them scandal," he said fiercely. "I've seen enough of war to know what matters truly. Courage, compassion, strength of spirit. You have shown more nobility in your actions than many born to the title. I love you, and I will have no other as my wife." Tears sprang to Anne's eyes. "I never dared hope," she whispered. "Hope now," he said softly, raising her hands to his lips. Later, in her chamber, Anne stood at her window, gazing at the harvest moon that had witnessed their exchange. She pressed her hands to her heart, where Edmund's words glowed like an ember, warming her through. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future, so much brighter than any she had dreamed possible. Morning sunlight streamed through the Solar's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Anne stood arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase when the door burst open. Lady Eleanor swept in, her silk skirts rustling like angry whispers. Behind her, several noble ladies hurried to find seats, their faces eager for the drama about to unfold. Well, Eleanor's voice cut through the quiet room like broken glass. If it isn't our precious new lady-in-waiting. Her lips curved in a cruel smile as she circled Anne like a cat toying with its prey. Anne's fingers trembled on the stems of the flowers, but she lifted her chin. "Good morrow, Lady Eleanor. How may I serve you?" "Serve me." Eleanor laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. "How fitting you should use that word. After all, service is what you were born to, is it not? Just like your mother before you." The watching ladies leaned forward in their chairs. Anne's heart began to pound. "My mother was a good woman who served this house faithfully." Faithfully. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "Is that what you call it? Then perhaps you can explain why, 10 years ago, valuable silver goblet disappeared from the Earl's collection on the very day your mother last worked in the Great Hall." A collective gasp rose from the assembled ladies. Anne felt the blood drain from her face. That was never proven. But the suspicion remained, did it not? Eleanor pressed. "Your mother left service shortly after. Some might say she fled before the truth could come to light. You dare slander my mother's name." Anne's voice shook with anger. The door opened again, and the Earl himself entered, followed by Edmund and Lady Margaret. They must have heard the commotion from the hallway. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?" the Earl demanded. Eleanor dropped into a perfect curtsy. "My lord, I merely thought it right that you should know the full history of the woman your son wishes to elevate above his proper station. A thief's daughter, attempting to steal not silver this time, but a noble title. These are serious accusations," the Earl said gravely. "An inquiry must be made." Anne's legs weakened. The dignity she had worked so hard to build these past weeks seemed to crumble around her. She gripped the edge of a table to steady herself. "Father, this is nonsense." Edmund strode forward, his face flushed with anger. "Lady Eleanor speaks. From jealousy, nothing more. Jealousy." Eleanor's laugh was sharp. "My Lord Edmund, need I remind you of our marriage contract? Signed by both our fathers when we were children. That contract still holds, regardless of whatever ... infatuation you may feel for this servant girl." The watching ladies whispered behind their hands. Anne felt their stares like physical blows. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "The inquiry will proceed," the Earl announced. "Until then, Mistress Whitlow will continue her duties." But under close observation, Anne fled as soon as she could do so without running. She walked blindly through the manor's corridors until she found herself in the chapel. The small space was cool and dim, scented with beeswax and incense. She lit a candle with trembling hands and sank to her knees before the altar. "Please," she whispered, her tears finally falling. "Dear God, let the truth prevail. My mother was innocent. I know she was. Please don't let her name be stained forever." The chapel door creaked open. Anne hastily wiped her eyes, but it was Edmund who entered. He knelt beside her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "I will never forsake you," he said fiercely. "Never. Let them investigate. They'll find nothing because there is nothing to find. Your mother was innocent, and you are worthy of any title in this land. But your contract with Lady Eleanor is worth less than dust to me," he interrupted. "I swear by all that's holy," Anne Whitlow, you are the only lady I will ever call wife." In the flickering candlelight, his eyes shone with such conviction that Anne felt hope kindle in her heart once more. The morning mist had barely lifted when Anne heard the whispers begin. Servants who once smiled warmly now turned away as she passed, their faces pinched with worry. Even the kitchen maid who had shared bread with her just days ago pretended not to see her in the corridor. The great manor, once filled with promise, had become a maze of turned backs and averted eyes. Through a window, Anne watched as another elaborate carriage arrived, bearing the crest of Eleanor's family. The Earl had been receiving such visitors all week, each one more grand than the last. Their message was clear. The betrothal between Sir Edmund and Lady Eleanor must stand in her small chamber. Anne folded her few precious belongings with trembling hands. The dress Lady Margaret had given her, now carefully pressed. The sprig of dried rosemary from Edmund, small prayer book that had been her mother's. Each item told the story of her brief, beautiful dream of belonging. "I cannot be the cause of strife," she whispered to the empty room. "I cannot bring shame to his name." The decision weighed heavy in her heart, but Anne knew what she must do. With quiet dignity, she made her way to Lady Margaret's solar, where the older woman sat, writing letters in the afternoon light. "My Lady," Anne said, dropping into a deep curtsy, "I have come to resign my position. I shall return to the laundress quarters immediately." Lady Margaret's quill stopped moving. She studied Anne with sharp eyes that had seen decades of court intrigue. "And why would you do such a thing, child?" "To protect Sir Edmund's honor, my lady. I would rather leave than see him torn between duty and—" Anne's voice faltered. "And kindness to one who deserves no such regard." Something softened in Lady Margaret's stern face. She set down her quill and rose, her silk skirts rustling. "I remember another scandal, years ago," she said slowly. "The old steward, a man who liked his wine too well and his accounts too loose. He died in his cups, but not before making several interesting confessions." Anne's heart quickened. "Confessions, my lady, indeed." Lady Margaret pulled a bell cord. "Send for the chaplain," she ordered the servant who appeared. Turning back to Anne, she said, "Your mother was not the only one accused of theft in those days. But she was, perhaps, the most convenient target for a guilty man's fears." The chaplain arrived, his gentle face concerned as Lady Margaret explained her suspicions. "The parish records," he said thoughtfully. "Yes, I believe I recall something. Allow me to search the archives." But Anne could not bear to wait. As evening fell, she slipped out of the manor and made her way through the rain to the riverbank, where everything had begun. The water rushed dark and wild, matching her turbulent thoughts. "Farewell, sweet dreams," she whispered to the wind. "Farewell, my love." And a voice cut through the storm. She turned to see Edmund on horseback, his cloak streaming behind him as he galloped toward her. He dismounted in one fluid motion, boots splashing in the mud as he reached for her. "My lord," she protested weakly, "you should not be here." "I will be wherever you are," he declared, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "Do not give up hope. The truth will prevail." "How can you be so certain?" Anne asked, even as she clung to his strength. "Because I know your heart," Edmund said simply, "and I trust in God's justice." The rain fell harder around them, but neither moved to seek shelter. Anne's fingers tightened around Edmund's as thunder rolled across the sky. In that moment, despite the storm's fury and the uncertain future, she felt the first stirring of fresh hope in her heart. "Stay," Edmund pleaded. "Stay and fight this battle with me." The river rushed on beside them, its song unchanged from the morning she had pulled him from its depths. Anne looked into his eyes and saw the same unwavering faith that had moved him. To kneel before her in the great hall, thunder crashed again, and Edmund drew her closer, sheltering her from the worst of the storm. Together they stood in the rain, two hearts united against the tempest of society's judgment. Holding fast to love and truth as lightning split the sky, the great hall loomed silent as a tomb in the gray morning light. Tall candles flickered in, their brass holders casting uncertain shadows across the gathering crowd. Every member of the household, from the lowest scullery maid to the highest-born guest, pressed against the walls or huddled near the massive stone fireplace. The Earl sat at the head of the long oak table, his face carved in stern lines, while Lady Eleanor perched beside him like a cat about to lap cream. Anne stood alone in the center of the hall, her simple gray dress a stark contrast to Eleanor's emerald silk. Though her hands trembled slightly, she held her head high, remembering Edmund's words by the river. The whispers around her fell silent as the chaplain entered, his weathered face grave but his eyes bright with purpose. "My Lord Earl," the chaplain began, his voice steady and clear as a church bell. "I have spent these past days searching through the parish records as duty and truth compelled me." He placed a leather-bound volume on the table with careful reverence. "And God, in His wisdom, has led me to certain revelations that must now be shared." Eleanor's smirk wavered slightly as the chaplain opened the book. The Earl leaned forward, his fingers drumming once on the wooden table before falling still. "Within these pages lies the final confession of Thomas Blackwood, who served as steward of Harrowfield Manor 15 years past." The chaplain's fingers traced the faded ink. "On his deathbed, witnessed by my predecessor and two brothers of the cloth, he admitted to a grave sin that had weighed upon his conscience." Anne's heart began to race. She could feel Edmund's presence behind her, though she dared not turn to look at him. Stewart confessed that he himself had taken the silver goblet, the very one that Anne Whitlow's mother was accused of stealing. The chaplain's voice grew stronger. He sold it to pay gambling debts and, in his shame and fear, allowed suspicion to fall upon an innocent woman. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Anne pressed her hands to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes as her mother's name was cleared at last. Eleanor shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "This cannot be," she protested. "Some ancient scribbling cannot erase the taint of common blood." "Silence!" The Earl's command cracked like thunder through the hall. He rose slowly, his eyes moving from the chaplain's book to Anne's face. "The evidence is clear, witnessed and recorded by men of God. We have done a grave injustice to the Whitlow family." Eleanor's triumph crumbled visibly as the Earl continued, each word measured and heavy with meaning. "More than this, we have witnessed in Anne Whitlow herself a nobility that comes not from birth but from character. She has served with grace, shown courage in adversity, and faced scandal with dignity that many of gentle birth would do well to emulate." Anne felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she stood straight and proud. The servants along the walls began to murmur in approval, and even some of the noble ladies nodded. "My Lord Father speaks truth." Edmund's voice rang out as he stepped forward. Before the entire household, he took Anne's hand in his touch warm and sure. "I vow before all gathered here that Anne shall never again suffer shame or scorn. Within these walls, she has proven herself worthy, not just of honor, but of love." Eleanor stormed toward the door, her skirts swishing in fury. "You will regret this breach of faith, Edmund. My family will not forget this insult." The heavy door slammed behind her, but few even turned to watch her go instead. All eyes were on Edmund and Anne, their joined hands a symbol of bridges built between two worlds. The first clap came from Lady Margaret. Then the chaplain joined, and soon applause filled the great hall. Servants and nobles alike joined in the celebration, the rigid barriers of rank forgotten in that moment of justice and joy. Through her tears, Anne saw the Earl nod slowly, acceptance, if not yet warmth, in his stern face. The morning sun broke. through the high windows, painting the scene in gold, as if heaven itself blessed this turning of the tide. The autumn sun painted golden patterns through the stained glass windows of the Manor's chapel as the congregation filed out after Sunday service. Anne lingered behind to help the chaplain gather prayer books, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The truth about her mother had cleared away the dark clouds of suspicion, though whispers still followed her through the Manor's halls. "Sir?" Edmund waited by the chapel door, resplendent in his best blue velvet doublet. His eyes found hers across the stone floor, and a smile warmed his features. "Mistress Anne," he said softly, offering his arm, "would you walk with me? The rose garden is lovely this time of year." Anne placed her hand on his sleeve, ignoring the pointed stares of departing nobles. Together they strolled through the covered walkway into the walled garden, where late roses still bloomed defiantly against the cooling air. Bees hummed lazily among the flowers, and the sweet scent of fading petals filled the air. Edmund led her to a stone bench beside a weathered sundial. Instead of sitting, however, he turned to face her. His expression grew serious, and Anne's heart began to flutter like a trapped bird. "My dearest Anne," he began, then gracefully dropped to one knee before her. She gasped, her free hand flying to her throat. "These past weeks have shown me the true measure of your character, your courage, your grace under fire, your boundless kindness to all. I know now what I suspected from the moment you pulled me from the river, that God sent you to save, not just my life, but my heart as well." Tears welled in Anne's eyes as Edmund reached for her hand. "Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Anne's voice trembled as she replied, "My Lord Edmund, I love you with all my heart, but there are still so many obstacles. The banns must be read, and the gossip, leave all that to me," Edmund said firmly, pressing a kiss to her fingers. "I shall speak with my father today and petition for a special license. You have endured enough whispers and speculation. I would spare you 3 weeks of wagging tongues." Anne's heart soared, even as her practical nature urged caution. "But will the Earl consent? Despite clearing my mother's name, I am still but a washerwoman's daughter. You are the lady who saved my life and captured my heart," Edmund declared. "Birth matters far less than the nobility of spirit you have shown throughout these trials." Later that afternoon, Edmund sought out his father in the Earl's private study. The older man sat behind his massive oak desk, examining estate ledgers. In the autumn light, he looked up as his son entered, his stern face softening slightly. "Father," Edmund began, "I come to seek your blessing." He stood tall and proud before the desk, every inch the knight he had become. "I wish to marry Mistress Anne Whitlow." The Earl set down his quill and studied his son for a long moment. "You understand what you ask? It's a complication such a match would bring." "I do," Edmund replied steadily. "And I also understand that I have never been more certain of anything in my life." To Edmund's surprise, a slight smile crossed his father's weathered features. "Your stubbornness does you credit, my son. These past weeks, I have watched that girl face every challenge with grace and dignity that would shame many noble-born ladies. Perhaps it is time we acknowledged that true character outweighs accidents of birth." Rising from his chair, the Earl placed a hand on Edmund's shoulder. "You have my blessing, and I shall write to the bishop myself regarding the special license." As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Anne climbed the narrow stairs to her chamber, her mind still whirling with the day's events. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stopped short, amazed by the sight before her. Where her simple work dress had hung that morning, there now stood a massive cedar chest. The lid was open, revealing layers of fine silk in jewel-bright colors: emerald, sapphire, and deep burgundy. A note lay atop the fabric in Lady Margaret's elegant hand. "Every lady needs a proper trousseau. Consider these a gift from one who has learned to see beyond station to the heart beneath. Anne sank to her knees beside the chest, running trembling fingers over the luxurious fabrics. Tears of gratitude spilled down her cheeks and onto the silks as she whispered a prayer of thanks for this unexpected kindness. In the gathering darkness, the future seemed to shimmer with promise. As bright and beautiful as the gifts before her, the village church glowed with hundreds of beeswax candles on that crisp autumn morning. Their warm light danced across faces, both noble and common, as the pews filled to capacity. Garlands of late roses and evergreen boughs decorated every surface, their sweet fragrance mixing with incense. The bells of St. Mary's began their joyous toll as Anne stood at the church door, her borrowed pearl-trimmed gown gleaming in the morning light. Lady Margaret had insisted on lending her the dress, along with a delicate lace veil that had graced 3 generations of Harrowfield brides. Anne's fingers trembled as she clutched her bouquet of white roses and rosemary. With steady steps, she walked down the aisle, her heart beating in time with the bells above. Sir Edmund waited at the altar, his eyes shining with pride and love. The Earl of Harrowfield stood beside his son, his stern face softened by an unexpected smile. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient words and solemn vows. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Edmund kissed Anne with tender reverence. Then the Earl stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. Today, he proclaimed in a voice that filled the chapel, "We witness more than a marriage. We see proof that true nobility dwells not in birth, but in deeds of courage and grace. I welcome Anne, not merely as my son's wife, but as the Lady of Harrowfield, earned through her own merit." Cheers erupted from villagers and nobles alike. The manor servants wiped joyful tears from their eyes, while Lady Margaret's smile grew wider than anyone had seen in years. That evening, Edmund led Anne on to the manor's wide stone balcony. The autumn air grew chill as they gazed down at the river below, its waters gleaming silver in the moonlight. Edmund wrapped his heavy cloak around them both, drawing Anne close against his heart. "Once that river nearly claimed my life," he murmured, "but instead it brought me to you." Anne leaned into his embrace, finally feeling the full dignity of belonging at his side, not as someone rescued, but as his equal partner in all things. Together, they stood watching the waters flow, their hearts as perfectly joined as their clasped hands. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.